watch this space.
To discuss what the rest of this sitting week might indeed bring, joining me now from Canberra are three crossbench senators, Sara Hanson-Young from the Greens, the Liberal Democrats David Leyonhjelm and Leader of the Australian Conservatives Party Cory Bernadi. Senators, welcome.
Good evening, Emma.
Sara Hanson-Young, we're hearing reports tonight the Greens are being fairly fiercely bullied by the Education Union into not submitting to the government on Gonski. Is that the truth of it?
Look, I think what everyone is trying to do is work out how we get the best possible deal for public schools. We know that what is on the table from Malcolm Turnbull doesn't go far enough, and it's
but pardon the interruption, it does take money away from so-called overfunded independent schools and redirects it to the public sector. That should be a tick for you, shouldn't it?
Yes, it does, but there are also issues in relation to making sure we tie in the states so that we have a fair system across the board, no matter what state your kid goes to school in. We need to make sure there is proper independence and a bit of a watchdog to ensure that the money that is put into the system is going to where it needs to go.
So can I just clarify with you that if you get the kinds of demands you've previously asked for, $5 billion extra or thereabouts, this carve-out for the Northern Territory, an independent watchdog, a mechanism to lock the states into their financial commitments, you'll be on board?
Look, we are considering what we will do. We've heard some encouraging signs from the government that they're willing to.
Can I just get a yes or no on that?
Well,
if you get your demands met, will you not cave into the Education Union and will you go with the government? It's a simple question.
Well, it's not that simple really, Emma, because the whole point here is that when you're in negotiation, when you're trying to get the best outcome for public schools as we are, it takes talk, it takes thinking, and we're trying to get everybody on the same page.
And political expediency.
Well, no. I mean, I urge my colleagues in the Senate, the other crossbenchers as well as the Labor Party and, of course, the government members, to consider backing the reforms that are needed to get the best possible outcome for schools. That means we're going to have to do better than what is on the table from the government, and it's encouraging to see a number of crossbenchers now taking up those ideas. An independent resource body, more money, a better time frame.
Let's bring in some of our other guests. Cory Bernadi, are you inclined to go with the government on this?
I will support the government if they limit the funding to the forward estimates. I will not support unfunded, borrowed money that has no accountability measures outside of that, because otherwise they might as well promise, you know, $1 trillion over the next 100 years. It's got the same credibility attached to it.
David Leyonhjelm, do you see any prospect the school's funding package will pass through the Senate this week, as Simon Birmingham has said he desperately wants to see happen? And just to remind everyone of the numbers, the government needs 10 of the crossbench to support it, 11 if Chris Back crosses the floor. Without Cory Bernadi and the Greens, there are 11 of you left.
Yeah, it's going to be difficult. As you say, they're going to need 10 out of 12 for the crossbench, or an extra one if Chris Back crosses the floor, although that would be a big thing for Chris to do. I'm not so sure that that's all that likely. But Jackie Lambie votes with Labor practically all the time, and I gather she's made some statements to the effect that she's on the side of the Catholics, who are opposed to the package at the moment, or opposed to the bill at the moment. So yes, it's going to be difficult for the government to get the numbers, and I have to say I haven't made up my mind clearly on this either. It's pretty much 50-50 at the moment.
Sara Hanson-Young, if you vote against this proposal, will it mean more or less money for government schools?
Well, Emma, we're not at a point to make a decision around whether we're going to vote yes or no. I'm absolutely...
It's got to weigh on your thinking though, doesn't it?
Absolutely it does. And that is why we're spending the time to make sure we look at the concessions that the government has been prepared to talk about. We've got to work out whether that is the best deal for public schools. I'm not going to be an apologist here for the fact that I want the best deal for public schools. They've been left behind for far too long, and it's time we started to rebalance the books.
Well, isn't that exactly what the government has said they want to do?
Well, they say they want to do it, Emma, but they've got to put the money on the table to make it happen.
Haven't they put $18.6 billion on the table for it?
Well, we know that there are such chronically underfunded public schools across the country that unless we give them a good boost early on, they will struggle to catch up. So put in place a fair model, absolutely important, but you need the money to get there. Otherwise, rich schools will keep laughing and poor schools will miss out.
And just a final word on this topic, Sara Hanson-Young. Describe your relationship with the Australian Education Union. It's variously reported that you're terrified of them.
Well, we've been talking with the Teachers Union, as we have with other public school advocates, the principals.
Let me bring you back to the question.
Well, we are talking with them, we're consulting with them, we've been working with them.
Are you terrified of them, as has been reported?
No, absolutely not. But what I must say, Emma, is that we all need to work together to get the best outcome for public schools. That's our goal, and we're working hard to do it.
Is the real issue here that you don't want to be seen to be making a deal with the government?
The real issue here is getting more money for our public schools. That's what we're interested in. That's what I've got my eye on the ball for, and that's what I'm working hard to do.
Let's talk about energy policy. The Energy and Environment Minister, Josh Frydenberg, has all but confirmed the government won't have an energy policy by the time the COAG energy ministers meet next month, and potentially not even before the next election. What do you make of that, David Leyonhjelm?
Well, it's a difficult one for the coalition, really difficult one. On the one hand, they're promising to meet our Paris Accords commitments on reducing carbon dioxide emissions. On the other hand, they're promising lower energy costs, lower electricity costs, and to make it more reliable. Now, they are virtually mutually exclusive. And how are they going to make it more reliable without coal? At the very least, black coal. How are they going to do that? And how are they going to drive down energy prices without coal? How are they going to meet the emissions targets unless the emission target is very generously set if coal is brought into it? I think they've created a problem for themselves, and they can't meet all their aspirations.
Cory Bernadi, the Prime Minister, has said that the alternative to Finkel is to do nothing and that nothing is not an option. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely not. In a spirit of generosity, I will give the coalition the energy policy they should take, which is stop throwing $3 or $4 billion every year at unreliable intermittent power, which makes baseload power from coal-fired or gas-fired generators uneconomic. Get out of the market, let the market do its job, and ultimately we will have the cheapest and most reliable electricity anywhere in the world, and I think that's what we need.
Sara Hanson-Young.
Oh, I just think this is extraordinary to see a report handed down from Finkel. It's a pretty weak report when it comes to tackling climate change. It was drawn up to appease the grumps on Malcolm Turnbull's backbench, and we've still got Tony Abbott squealing like a lonely pig. And the reality is here, nothing that is put on the table to deal with climate change is going to satisfy Tony Abbott, and Malcolm Turnbull has to realise that. Stand up, be counted. Coal isn't clean. Get on with putting proper plan in place for renewables.
Cory Bernardi, if anyone here knows the Conservative backbench of the government, it's you. How hard do you expect them to push back against this clean energy target? And does this issue again put Malcolm Turnbull's leadership in doubt?
I suspect the Conservative backbench will have looked at the Finkel review and noted that he said no matter what Australia does, it will make not one jot or tittle of difference to the global temperatures. And so I presume they'll be mindful of that, and they'll also be mindful of the electorate, like in South Australia, where they can go for days without electricity thanks to the policies of the Greens and the Labor Party, and until last week the Xenophon Party.
Did you read the Finkel review?
Oh, I've read aspects of it, but not the thing from cover to cover, no.
Because there's a point in there where they say business as usual actually produces a worse price outcome than under a clean energy target or an emissions intensity target. So when you talk about the electorate, certainly that would focus the minds of consumers, wouldn't it?
Yeah, he's probably right in the sense that business as usual, which is throwing billions of dollars of subsidies to uneconomic intermittent power like wind and solar, which has failed so miserably everywhere in the world, is really inappropriate. So we do need to change, and that means government has to get out of the way. We'll save billions of dollars. And might I say this, Emma, in South Australia, if you ran every wind farm, every solar panel and every gas and coal-fired power station, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, electricity would be about 30% cheaper than it currently is. There is a rort going on. The generators are rigging the system, and government subsidies are helping them to do it.
David Leyonhjelm, Tony Abbott's former Chief of Staff Peter Credlin, writing for News Corp over the weekend, proposed the federal government help fund low-emission, high-efficiency coal-fired power stations for baseload reliability and affordability. What do you think of that proposal?
Well, that's what Germany and Japan are doing. They're building these coal-fired power stations exactly along those lines. I don't see how the government is going to keep the lights on if they don't do that. You know, there's not enough gas. The solar and wind generators are unreliable, and batteries are totally unaffordable yet. The technology is developing, but they're not there yet. How else are they going to keep the lights on? We need more electricity. We've already got people who are having to choose between eating and heating their houses, staying warm. You know, it's a highly unsatisfactory situation. Any government that allows blackouts in the next summer is going to lose an election. That's a simple fact. They're going to have to keep the lights on somehow, and you know, that's even ignoring the fact that there are jobs and manufacturing and all sorts of consequences from having very high power prices.
I wanted a final quick comment from each of you on the Supreme Court of Victoria considering contempt charges against 3 fairly senior Victorian ministers. Sara, Hanson-Young.
Well, look, I think this is extraordinary to see the 3 ministers dragged in front of the court like this. They have been caught out shooting their mouth off. They didn't even know what they were really talking about. They seemed to be oblivious to the idea that this case was underway.
Even though all 3 are lawyers.
Even though all 3 are lawyers. I mean, it really does shine a spotlight on the kind of hyper politics of this government, that their ministers can't even get a briefing before they shoot their mouths off these days. They haven't apologised. I think they should. And of course, the court hasn't decided what they'll do in relation to the minister's contempt, but it should be a warning sign to the rest of the government ministers. Stay out of the way, let the courts do their job. You know, free speech is fine, but a fair trial for citizens is more important.
David Leyonhjelm.
I profoundly disagree with Sara. I think these judges are acting like thin-skinned little daffodils.
It's important to protect the integrity of the judicial system, isn't it?
Interference, when I did my law degree, I understood that interference with a trial to influence the outcome of a trial was what contempt amounted to, not saying things that the judges didn't like to hear. It's a free speech issue, in my opinion.
Okay, we're running out of time. I'll get a quick response from Cory Bernadi.
It's judicial overreach. I think the sentencings of some courts and some magistrates and judges is grossly inadequate, and good on them for belling that cat.
Cory Bernadi, David Leyonhjelm, Sara, Hanson-Young, thanks for your time.
Good evening, Emma. Thanks for having